This week, I read the LegalTech Founders Report by Alex Baker, and of course, I brought him in to discuss 300 hours, 200 founders, incredible truths about go-to-market in legal tech. Most legal tech founders get excited by an idea, they build the product, then they try to sell it. Wrong order. The winners start with the problem. They know who feels it the most. They quantify the value to the pound or the dollar. Only then do they build. That's the gap between the founders raising a Series A and the ones still hunting for their first 10 clients. So I sat down with Alex, asked him what's really in the report, what he's seeing across 500 companies, and what go-to-market actually looks like for the next 12 months. This week on Taking Legal Tech to Market. Let's go. Alex, let's start with the founders report. So 300 hours, 200 founders, one report. What was one of the most uncomfortable findings for you that you kind of came across in that endeavor?
Um, cool. I don't think, Phil, it's really uncomfortable for me because we help founders to resolve all of these problems that the report covers. I think something that's not necessarily covered in the report and is something that I'm seeing more recently is that this 9 to 12 month mark post raise is is emerging as being like a really difficult period for founders. So I put that down to it being like a really messy time for go to market, right? You got enough time that's passed when the announcement's taken place, you've got a lot of attention, there's a lot of interest, people are coming to you, but you've got to convert that into revenue. And you will have tried a lot of the really obvious go to market plays. Now it's about, like I said, converting that into revenue, but also then where do you go from there? How do you then build this into something that's going to scale into the sort of business that's going to generate a return for all of those investors?
One of the things I read in there was that you wrote that buyers don't need to like the product, they need an undeniable reason to change. So what is an undeniable reason and what does it actually look like when a founder has one? And what does the deck or the demo sound like when they don't?
Yeah. Great question. So for me, it goes right back to the start and the inception of the business. Often I'm seeing, and this came out in the report as well, you've got founders that are get excited by an idea. So they go and build a product and then they go and try and sell it. Now that has changed more recently because obviously with the advent of vibe coding, it's now incredibly easy to go and build a prototype to go and test your idea. But even then, even now, you can do that in like an afternoon. It still seems to be that really early stage founders still are not going out and validating that this idea is commercially viable and that there are buyers that are willing to part with their hard-earned money to be able to go and purchase and procure these these solutions. One of the aspects of trying to understand whether or not this idea and this business is commercially viable is quantifying the amount of value that you're going to create. And so if you are going to go and if you're building an application to sell into the world's largest law firms and you're going to be creating £1,000 worth of value for them, the question really is like, is that enough to make them change? And not only is it enough, but when you compare yourself to the other legal tech solutions that are out there, are you going to be the first taxi off the rank to be procured? If you're going to go and sell into a firm the size of Clifford Chance with billions in revenue, is that £250,000 going to make a difference? And so I think it all comes down to how much impact you're going to make within the organization and how much of a pressing strategic problem this is that you are trying to address, either for them now or in the imminent future. That £250,000 is not a lot to a very big organization. would be quite a lot to a solo practitioner, for example, potentially. Could be even more to an individual that isn't a lawyer. So that amount of value is different depending on who your customer is. So really trying to understand whether or not the amount of value that you're creating is significant for that organization. That really comes down to are you giving me an undeniable reason to change?
When it comes down to, I think we're talking about this a little bit here, but when it comes down to demand creation, and you're a legal tech founder, of course, or go-to-market leader selling into law firms, walk me through what you would have a pre-seed founder do in their first 90 days or so.
So we've got to start off with the problem. Everything hangs off of that, right? What is the problem? Who experiences this problem to the greatest degree? And how much value, as we were just talking about, will we create by solving it? Those three things really define the foundations of your strategy. Because if you know what the problem is, that is the foundations for your messaging, how you put this message out to the market. It's not about your shiny solution and all the great features it's got. If you communicate a problem to someone and someone experiences that problem, it's immediately going to resonate. Whereas trying to communicate, this is the solution that we've got, we think it does all of these things really well, that can sometimes leave buyers a bit confused about whether or not it's the right fit for them. If you talk about their problem and they're experiencing it, it's simple, it's clear. So what's the problem? Who experiences it to the greatest degree? So if you say, for example, I build contract drafting for lawyers, that could apply to any one of the millions of lawyers around the world, right? But who experiences problem with contract drafting that you resolve in the best possible way ahead of the rest of the competition? Is it a Magic Circle law firm partner? Or is it a solo practitioner? Whereabouts are they based? What type of drafting work do they do? And so on and so forth. And when you're just getting started, you've got to be really narrow in defining who is that client that you are going to serve, where you're going to create the most amount of value for them. And that isn't just about the number of lawyers that might use your product within any organization, because if we take that example again of like an enterprise or a Magic Circle law firm, they might have a myriad of trainees, paralegals, etc., that can do this sort of work. So is that problem really something that they have, or is it the solo practitioner that doesn't have the time to do drafting properly, really needs that support? And I'm using that like kind of black and white scenario really to paint a picture, but it tends to be far more nuanced than that. But finding that right pocket of where we're going to create the most value, where our solution is needed most, and defining off the back of that where we're going to focus our very limited amount of resources. That's the second piece. And then quantifying the value, as we've talked about, that all helps in then being able to articulate very clearly and evidence how we're going to give them a return on their investment. But it also helps us to shape the pricing strategies that we might use to be able to determine how much we're going to charge for our service. Because it's not just about the amount we're going to charge, but it's also about the mechanism through which we're going to charge. Is it going to be per seat pricing? Is it going to be per event pricing? Is it going to be tokens? And so on and so forth. We've got to understand how that prospective client is getting value and then charge accordingly.
In the report, you segment legal tech startups into 3 stages: the pre-revenue idea, validation and first clients, and 1 to 5 million ARR. From your point of view, what's the biggest go-to-market mistake you've seen at each of these stages?
Ooh, great question. I think for me, at the inception, the real challenge is where a founder is, they're getting overly enthusiastic with their idea, right? So, how do I say this? the founder finds this problem intellectually interesting rather than it being a problem that a buyer is willing to pay to solve. So this now is like, it's almost a pandemic of this with vibe coding, right? Like everyone now can create something. But the key difference and distinction between building a prototype like that, even if it's functioning, and building a business around it is someone willing to part with their cash? And you need to do due diligence around that before you go down the path of creating a business around it, because that frankly is, it's going to be a significant commitment in terms of time and resources, etc., if you're actually going to pursue this as a business avenue. A product market fit, PMF, I think founders get confused by having a couple of logos and repeatability. So just having one or two successful pilots is great, is certainly getting your first foot on the ladder, but repeatability, being able to sell that same solution into the same buyer profile with the same use case, and starting to see evidence of that repeatability, that for me is more product market fit. But I think a lot of founders think it's the former. And then go to market and scale. It's almost always, the biggest challenge is almost always like codifying founder-led sales into a motion that can be executed by a wider team that haven't been embedded in the business ever since its inception. So being able to codify that knowledge, codify how you message it, codify what the process looks like when you're winning clients, when you're taking them through pilots, when you're growing adoption internally. I think that's the biggest challenge when legal tech companies are starting to scale up.
Something else I wrote down from looking at the report was that you wrote that founders do not realize what is slowing them down until they're 6 to 12 months in. What's the early signal that something is wrong before the obvious problem of the pipeline tells you that?
Two things. One, gut. So, I've met so many founders that come to us and go, we're not growing as fast as I feel we could be. And almost always that's true. So that gut feeling of, why isn't this working? Why aren't we moving faster? Why can't we do more? I think that's the first signal. The second signal is leading indicators. So a lot of founders work back from a target that they set themselves top down, or that might be set by their investors, right? And being able to generate a return. So we want to hit 1 million in revenue. We want to hit 5 million in revenue, 10 million, whatever it happens to be. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of work done in working back to what are the actions that we need to take on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that gets us there. And there's even less rigor around measuring those numbers as time progresses. So if we say we would need 1 million in revenue by the end of this year, and we charge £100,000 for our service. Okay, we need 10 clients. Obvious, right? Simple maths. But if the sales cycle is 9 months and you've got a 20% conversion rate, you're going to need to have 50 clients in your pipeline, prospective clients in your pipeline 3 months from now in order to hit that number 12 months down the road. And so I think that is one of the key simple things that a lot of founders could do, is measuring those leading indicators rather than waiting the 6 to 12 months and going, oh no, we're not on track to hit our number. Because then you can adjust accordingly, right? If things aren't on track, you can course correct really early.
Do you think that, in terms of your first point, founders are often thinking they should be moving quicker, they should be growing faster? Is that it? Doesn't everyone always feel like that, no matter how fast they're growing, no matter how great their numbers are. And sometimes is it not a case of, these things compound over the time and maybe there's a little bit of patience, or do you see that or not?
I mean, there's definitely the compounding piece, right? Like if you layer on an improvement in, I don't know, outbound messaging and you improve your messaging by 10%, that has a knock-on effect to the number of demos that you then get. If you've then got a better sales process, sales motion, how you move those initial demos through the pipeline, what the actions are that you need to take, and so on and so forth, and you improve that by 10%, that has a knock-on effect too. Like all of these elements that you can improve even marginally can have a compounding impact. It's one of the beautiful things about sales and marketing, but also one that is somewhat frustrating, is that there's always more to be done. There's always more that you could do. There's always more to improve. There is no ceiling, right? So that's a double-edged sword for some people. I love it because for me, it's like, how can we do better in every single part of this business? How do we move faster? How do we turn that dial up to from 10 to 11 and so on and so forth? But for some people, that pace of evolution is hard to get their head around.
There's often gaps in terms of how fast the company should be growing from founders, from investors. But there's also sometimes a gap, I think, between what investors want to see in a go-to-market plan and what actually works as well when you're selling into law firms. Where have you seen that gap being widest, and what do founders end up doing because the deck demands it rather than what the market does?
I'm not sure I've seen it that much, Paul, to be honest with you. I don't know if you've got any examples, but I think investors really are just keen to ensure that they are placing their bets with the right people, that they have confidence in being able to either execute themselves or bring in those that are competent at being able to execute. From the investors I've worked with, I haven't seen that much of hands-on involvement in terms of how the business is taken to market. And yeah, they can advise and they can help and they can make introductions, which is always helpful. But in terms of the actual shape of the go-to-market motion, I haven't seen that much.
Okay, no, cool. Okay. You've engaged with more than 500 legal tech companies across UK, US, Europe, APAC. What kind of differences have you noticed in terms of geography, in terms of that go-to-market motion?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't think it's hugely different depending on geography, other than maybe two minor elements. So from an APAC perspective, I used to be based in Singapore. And so a lot of the Southeast Asian markets, for example, they don't have the capacity to invest in, some of the top tier legal tech companies. So the pricing, and this comes down to like how much value do you create for the different types of organizations, right, that you're trying to sell to. The pricing there, what you might charge a top tier UK Magic Circle firm is not going to make sense in markets like India and across Southeast Asia. So I think there you've got to be incredibly aware of what the value is within those specific countries over in the East. And then over in the West, I mean, it's just scale, right? Like US companies, you've just got the entirety of the US to go after. There's 300 million people in the US. The scope and the scale is just vast. One thing I have noticed is that I think previously, if you were looking to go and put a foot into the US market, you used to have to go and be present there. Now I think it's much easier for companies that are based out of the UK or out of Europe to win their first clients over in the US before they then go and start investing in setting up an office and setting up a team over in the States. So I think that's one thing that, globalization, internationalization, whatever you want to call it, has really helped with. But if you're really serious about going over into the US and vice versa, US companies coming into UK and Europe, it provides a good test bed. But if you really want to grow, you're going to have to spend some time on the ground, meeting with clients, putting in some face time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, three recruitment markets I know well are UK, US, and Australia, and there's UK somewhere in the middle of that. US recruitment market, very transactional. I can make a call or send an email to somebody cold. If I do it at the right time, I could get in there. If I try to do that in Australia, which is the absolute other extreme, it's just not going to happen. I need to court a client for weeks, months. They need to know me. They need to know all about me before they start to engage with me. And they're two extremes. Then UK is literally in the middle of that, and there's somewhere in the middle. Is that the kind of thing you notice, that kind of thing?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I used to be based in Sydney for a few years, so I certainly had that experience, um, based out of there. In terms of, sorry, phone's going off then. In terms of, yeah, it's a much more what's the word I'm looking for? Friendly atmosphere in which to do business and to court clients, and go have a beer with a client. It's very, very common down under. UK, I think we're a little bit more stiff in our business approaches. And then US, like you say, yeah, transactional. It's like, let's get to the point here. Let's cut to the chase. How does this work? How's it going to help me? What do I have to pay for it? Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. I love working in the US market, by the way, for those very reasons. But cool. Okay, moving forward. So, of the founders you've spent meaningful time with, how many of them would you say have actually built a repeatable sales motion versus the ones who need them to be in the room to get those deals done and to have that pipeline, if that makes sense?
Well, I think it depends on their stage. So up until the latter points of like that product market fit stage that we were talking about earlier, I think the founder needs to be in the room, not just to close the deal, but you're still really early on in your business journey,
Mm,
right? So there is so much value that you get out of those conversations that goes beyond the revenue that you close in the contract. You're hearing different clients' needs, wants. You'll be given ideas about how you might be able to do something a different way, or someone's perception of even a feature might give you inspiration around how you then communicate that moving forward. So I think up until like product market fit stage, it's all about identifying what that repeatability looks like. Once you go past that, once you are starting to take your product to market at scale, and you're starting to bring in people to be able to help you with that, you already need to have that repeatability. If you don't have it, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it is, whilst also trying to support new team members, also trying to figure out what it is. So I always urge founders to find that repeatability before they start adding headcount on top of, dare I say it, like shaky foundations.
What about pricing? And I've spoken to a couple of legal tech go-to-market leaders who have gone into companies, and one of the first things they've done is literally 10x the price of the product because the founder has not realized the value that it has. What are some of the more common pricing mistakes you've seen in that kind of first 18 months or so?
Well, again, I think it all comes back to like, what's the value you're creating here, and how are you creating that value, and what are the fundamental elements that define what that value is. Is it time saved per action, or time saved per week or extra revenue that is generated or whatever it happens to be, right? There's many different ways in which you can quantify it. But the main mistake I see is the founders not thinking about or quantifying exactly what that value is. And it sounds really simple when you say it like that, but a lot of the time it's like, well, there's solutions out there and they charge £50 per user per month, or there's another solution that charges $500 per user per month, and we'll just try and fit ourselves somewhere in the middle. And rather than guessing, just like put yourself in the buyer's shoes. And I'd urge anyone that's thinking about this, not just from a pricing standpoint, but from every aspect of your commercial motion, to think about it through the lens of the buyer. So what is the problem that the buyer has? What are the actions that the buyer needs to do in order to start using your solution? What are the steps that you need them to take? What's your buyer aligned sales motion? How much value do you create for the buyer? And then everything that you do within your business should be thinking about that and emulating that. It's not rocket science.
Absolutely. What is the most underrated and overrated go-to-market channel in LegalTech right now?
Underrated. Underrated, I'd probably say the phone. Believe it or not. It sounds really old school, really archaic. People still use phones these days. But when you use the phone, you can have a conversation with somebody. And I think there's this perception that it's a bit like a double glazing salesman, right? You're picking up the phone to speak to someone to try and sell them something that they just don't need. Ice to Eskimos, if you like. But the way I think about it is that if you've done all of that foundational work already and you've created a product that does create value and you know exactly who you create value for, then you're actually doing them a favor if you're going to pick up the phone and speak to them and offer your solution that's going to help them in some meaningful way. So I would say the phone is certainly underrated in that regard. Having a conversation person to person, understanding whether or not this is a good fit, and doing that really quickly, right? Like you should be able to do that in a couple of minutes of meeting somebody. Is this worth exploring further? And then overrated, I mean, email, I think, is probably overrated. Yes, it's where all partners live. Yes, it's where a lot of lawyers spend a lot of their time. But there is a lot of noise out there. There's more than 5,000 legal tech companies out there on the market now. All of the technology that you need to fire up your spam cannon and blast out 5,000 emails a day is readily available. But is it going to set you apart? Is it going to move the needle? Is it even going to get you any meetings? I don't think so. It's unlikely.
Yeah, it's interesting with email. I mean, it's certainly not a channel that I use for anything really. With things like Clay and things that can enrich data, it's something people think, oh, this is great. I can get all these really personalized messages out to people without having to put the work in and put the thought into it. But what that means is that the buyer is just receiving even more emails, and so it just dilutes it anyway. So it kind of counteracts each other. So I think for me, obviously not selling into legal tech, but whoever I'm trying to contact, for me, my goal is always to make sure that person knows that it is me and it's not AI, it's not automation. And that could be a phone call, could be a voice note, something like that, something that makes them feel that, oh, okay, it's not spam. But it's difficult to do these days because you can pretty much spam anything. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
to get
I agree with you. And even if you use those personalized solutions, but I mean, haven't you seen this? Like, you can immediately, when you read those, see
yeah.
that it's not been generated by a human, even if it is personal, right? The personalized element that's in the first paragraph tends to not be linked to what the offering is. Great to see that you've got a services company. We do something completely irrelevant to the fact that I'm a services company, for example. So I think if you're going to use tech to help you to get in front of people, there are ways in which you can do it, but you got to be really careful that you're not just spraying and praying blindly.
Absolutely. Final question, just your kind of read on the legal tech market as a whole, and it's a market I'm very involved in, and obviously you are as well. And there's so much that's happened in the last kind of 2 or 3 years' time. If you see like the climb of the Harveys, Lagoras, so many companies are just at this astronomical size, didn't even exist a few years ago. It's just crazy to see the investment and the headcount growth, things like that. Then we've got things like Anthropic getting stuck into the legal tech market as well quite recently. What's your read on where the legal tech market is going, in these next 12 months? And I guess, what's your kind of message to maybe those founders who are thinking they've got an idea and a way to get into legal tech and a product to take to market? What's your read on the market? The the appetite for the buyers for more people to enter it, if that makes sense.
Um, I think there is just so much opportunity out there that I would feel there is so much opportunity out there, you can't ignore it. And there's so many different ways in which you can get involved to create more value for the industry, right? If you're an existing legal tech vendor, how can you use all the latest AI capabilities to be able to further develop and enhance your product? There's a number of companies now that are existing legal tech providers that are bolting on law firms to be able to offer an end-to-end service. That's a really new, interesting, emerging part of the market where rather than just providing technology to the lawyers, they're now providing the service, the entirety of the service, powered by their technology for the end client. That's a super interesting space. You've got these AI native law firms that are emerging. I think there's now something like 40 or 50 doing all of these sort of different niche services. They aren't law firms in the sort of legacy respect of full service. We do all different things for all sorts of different types of clients, whether or not they be businesses or individuals or otherwise. But this is like a new category that's emerging, which I find really interesting too, where they behave like tech companies, but actually they're law firms being rebuilt from the ground up. And so I think that's a really exciting part of the market. And you then got vibe coding and the ability to utilize things like Claude and Anthropic to be able to create new services or prototype new services and products so much faster than you ever could before. And I think that's going to lead to a number of new, really interesting services being created. And you've also got the law firms, right? I work with 3 of the top 50, and they're building products to better service their clients, to extend the value proposition of their services beyond just the legal documentation. I mean, there is just so much opportunity out there. It's amazing. And I think really AI is creating a lot of opportunity for anyone that's willing to embrace it. And I think more for what, the space in which you and I exist and operate around the commercial side and the go-to-market side. There was an article in the FT last year about, I think it was something along the lines of, do we need like talent diversification coming into the legal industry? And I think that's right. I think the future of law firms, tech-enabled services, AI-native law firms, etc., it's going to be less reliant on the lawyers and more reliant on the developers and the go-to-market experts and all of those supporting functions that create the business around the service. So I think it is a super, super exciting time for the industry as a whole.
Love it. Well, I hope so, and I feel the same, and I hope that rings true in the coming years. So, Alex, thank you so much for being a part of taking legal tech to market.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thanks for having me on.